Have you ever made a quilt block and couldn't get it to fit to the next one, whether it was too small or too large, or maybe it just had a bunch of whole wonkiness going on? Well, let me show you how to square up your block, and we will start with the components of the block and work our way to the outside of the block. So grab your rotary cutter, your favorite ruler, and let's get started. So what I have on my table is what's called a shoe fly block. Now, a shoe fly block is composed of 4 half square triangles and then 5 squares. But in order for it to fit right, and this is supposed to be 12.5, all my components that are needed to make up the block need to be 4.5 inches before I join them. So I've made some half square triangles just to show you. So not only do you have to square up your block, but if you begin by squaring up your components, the shapes that are needed to make up the block, you will have more success when you get to the end. So here's a half square triangle, and what I do is I place the seam line on the diagonal going from the top right to the bottom left. That's just easier for me. Now that's because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you would probably go like this, so you could trim here and here first. But as I said, I'm right-handed. So this is a go-to ruler for me. This is my 6.5 inch square up ruler by Creative Grid. And so what I do is I place the diagonal line that runs from the top right corner to the bottom left-hand corner right on the seam line. So remember, this block needs to measure 4.5 inches before I sew it to the next shape, component, whatever you want to call. All right, so I'm going to line that up. And the first thing I do is I check. Now let's look all the way around the ruler. And once you start training yourself to do this, it goes really fast. But the first time you do it, even maybe the second or third, you're going to be like, oh, this takes too long. But in the long run, it's worth it. Now, because this is a half square triangle, it doesn't matter how much I take off of each side as long as I keep that 45-degree line going all the way through it. So let's see here. Now, here's the 4.5 inch line right here. And you can see that fabric goes past that line. That's a good sign because that means I can trim. It means I didn't sew wrong or I didn't previously cut wrong. Same thing down here. I'm watching or I'm following the 4.5 inch line, and I have fabric that extends past it. Now, most of the time, I can bring the ruler all the way down like this and still trim. Now, what I did was I moved it along the 45-degree line so that I can trim off most here. And if I was a really, really good piecer, I could have moved that straight down and then just only had to trim 2. But, well, you know, it's just fabric. It's not nerve endings. We can still remain friends that I don't sew perfectly. Actually, I started with oversized pieces so I could trim down. Okay, so I'm going to hold the ruler steady and trim off one side. See, I took that much off, and then I'm going to trim at the top. Now, a lot of times when I'm trimming, I do my best to put a finger on the outside of the ruler that can push up against the edge, either at the bottom or on the side. So do whatever's comfortable for you so that when you put the rotary blade up against the ruler, you don't push it, because as soon as you start pushing your rotary blade, the ruler can shift. So I trimmed the right and the top. Now I'm going to take this bottom corner over here, this bottom left-hand corner, and I'm going to rotate it until it is in the position of top right. Just like that. Just a quick turn. Place the ruler back on the half square triangle. And again, our measurement's supposed to be 4.5 inches. So I'm running the 4.5 inch line right along the cut edge, the 2 cut edges that I just did. So that's right here and it's right there. So now we can see that there's a little bit running past the edge of the ruler here, and it looks like I know I at least got to trim off that. And so I've got a little bit to trim off at the top. And so that's what we're going to do. And notice how I have my hand placed. I put a finger on the outside of the ruler, however your hand can expand, because it really will help the ruler to not move as soon as you start cutting. Ta-da! Isn't it pretty like that? So now I have more to trim of these because I have a lot of these to put in. I have a big quilt. I'm making a king size quilt. So now this will fit in one of its positions and it will join to the unit that's next to it nice and evenly and perfect. So another component that's going to go into the quilt that I'm working on that I just showed you the half square triangles with the big 12-inch block, and I'm going to show you how we trim up the 12-inch block in just a minute. But let's work on triangles before we go on to a block, because this is another type of triangle that is, sometimes it can give others a little bit of a headache. This little baby has 3 triangles, and we want to make sure, I'm going to turn the block sideways. There we go. We want to make sure that we have a 1/4 inch seam allowance from the tip of this triangle to the edge of the fabric. And still, the block needs to be 4.5 inches square. Even though when you look at this, this looks like a rectangle, but it's really a square. So here's one I haven't trimmed. So the first thing I want you to do, anytime you're working with any of these units, before you go to trim, make sure that you have pressed the block flat. If you're one of those that presses from the back and you don't flip it over and press it from the front, please start making that a habit. You'll be much happier with your work. With this type of block, I always start with this right here. And I want to make sure I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to grab my ruler. And again, this is my go-to. It's my 6.5 inch ruler. All right. So now I did press this. I promise. Okay. We're going to line this up. I am very careful with this one. This block or this component is supposed to be 4.5 inches. I always go to midpoint or halfway first, which is 2 1/4. 2 1/4 plus 2 1/4 equals 4.5. I place the 2 1/4 inch line right on, I'm going to move this so you can see. I place it right there on the tip, and then the ruler has a 1/4 inch line running along it right here, so that rests right at the tip on the white, mine's white fabric, but yours might be another color, but it's the 2 that are on the outside. Okay, so if there's anything that I can trim, now I want to do this first. You always want to do the triangle tips first. Again, hold your ruler steady. There we go. And see, that's not a whole lot that I trimmed off, but to me, it's worth it. Okay, so now I want to take, and I'm going to flip it this way, because I've already trimmed this. I want to trim over here, and I'm going to, again, I'm going to put the center measurement right there. It's right here, 2 1/4, and I've got my 4.5 inch line running along the top of the block, and literally there's just like fibers, there we go, to trim off. Okay, now I want to go do this side. I'm going to completely rotate it around. I treat triangles different, this type of block, than I do a half square triangle. All right, so there we go. Now, did you repeat? Line up the 2 1/4, because that's what we're going to do. I'm going to line the 2 1/4 right there in the center. I've got the 4.5 inch line running over here, and I am good. And there's nothing to trim. Yay! I'm going to go ahead and do it. There wasn't anything left to trim. And so the last side is the bottom, and you're just going to take the 4.5 inch line, align it, and trim off any excess. And I don't have any excess. I'm good. I have nothing. So that's how you would trim your components before you put them in a block. And let's look at this block now. It should, magic word, it should be 12.5 inches. So I can't use my little 6.5 inch ruler to do that. So I'm going to grab my larger ruler. and this is my 12.5 inch. Now, Creative Grid makes a lot of square rulers. Choose the ones that you need and that your go-to rulers that you'll use often. With the Creative Grid rulers, your white circles with the numbers inside are your inch. The ones that are black circles that have the numbers inside are the 1/2 inch. Make it so that you can read it correctly. Because I squared my components up as I went along, I'm not really having to take a whole lot off. The only reason I would have to is because I didn't get a perfect seam allowance. So keep that in mind. I've got my big 12.5 inch square ruler. I've aligned it up here in the top right hand corner, and I'm going to follow my diagonal line. And look, it hits right here in the corner, and it comes right here, and it hits right here in the corner, and it goes just a little bit off right here. So let me see if I can tweak it. There we go. And I have some that I can trim off over here, and I have a little bit of fibers over here. The one thing you're looking for is if any of your fabric is under the ruler, as in it does not go all the way to the edge of the ruler. If it doesn't go to the edge of the ruler, you need to figure out what you're going to trim that block to, and then you're going to have to trim all the other blocks that go into the quilt to that measurement. So my suggestion is to measure all your blocks. Don't cut anything. Trim all your blocks that go in the same quilt to the smallest size, and everything will fit together. I'm going to move it up just a little because I feel like I can't. Yep, there is fabric up there. Yes. Okay. All right, so I'm going to trim this side, and I just have a few. Now this ruler is a little harder to put my finger out on the outside to hold the ruler in place. So what I do is on the big blocks is I try not to trim this side and the top at the same time, because you're really not supposed to. I didn't tell you that, did I? Okay, now we're going to rotate it one because I just finished that one. I'm going to place the ruler back down on the block, making the 45 degree, or placing the 45 degree right along the diagonal seam. So I should have everything lined up really nice. And I have just a few fibers. Okay. One more turn. Actually, there's 2 more turns. Nice and clean. So, one other thing I want to point out to you, and I wanted to do this on this side. Okay, this is side number 3. Do you see how this is hanging over right there? I want to make sure that I have a 1/4 inch seam from the tip of this pink triangle to this edge right here. That's very important, because if you trim too much of it off, then what happens is when you're sewing, you'll trim off like that much of your 1/2 square triangle point. And I know sometimes it's okay not to worry about that, but at the same time, you put all this work into it. Let's try to make it so that we don't have to make excuses while we trimmed off our tips or we sewed them off. So let me line it up over here, because those are the sides I've already cut. So it's from there to there, and I have plenty, so I can trim off this excess over here. Ta-da! And one last turn. All right, here we go. This is the final turn. And I'm looking at the 45. Now, once you get used to doing this, it'll just come natural to you. And yeah, you'll forget it sometimes, but it's okay. There we go. Very, very nice. So here I have a different type of block. Here's your block right here, the center, and then I added triangles to the outside to make it larger. So you can use your regular strip cutting ruler. And what you need to do is find midpoint. Okay, and my midpoint is literally right here where the triangles join. So I want to take, and I want to make sure I have a 1/4 inch past this intersection. Now I've already trimmed this side over here, and I need to trim this one and the other two. So I'm going to lay my ruler down. Creative Grid, and maybe other manufacturers, ruler manufacturers, I don't know, but they give, these are the 45-degree lines right here, and they form right here, or they cross each other on the 1/4 inch intersection. And I can lay this right at my intersection, and then it shows me what I need to trim. Love that. All right, so let's trim that. Doo-doo. See, I'm giving myself a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and this is important when you are working with the units on the outside. Now I've got this one trimmed and it's ready to sew to the next blocks. You know how we piece our blocks and we get these little dog ears, or whatever you want to call them, these little mouse ears that form, or not form, that they extend past your block, and you've got all these seams that are coming together and they just kind of don't allow the block to lay really flat. Well, you need to iron it flat so that you can get a true measurement. So now let's think about this. If I start trimming off this excess, I need to first make sure that this 1/4 inch seam line does not run underneath here. It stays past so that I've got plenty to trim. And I probably need to tweak my ruler. I need to turn it just a little bit and trim off the excess. Okay, we're going to focus right in here. Look how skinny that seam is right there as opposed to that one. I don't have a 1/4 inch. If I lay this ruler down the way it's supposed to be, oopsie, I do not have a 1/4 inch. I have just shy of one. So if I trim this off, I'm going to have issues. And honestly, I believe it's in this component, this unit right here. But I'm going to trim off that dog ear. And that's all I'm going to trim off. So if you run into this situation, just trim off what is absolutely necessary. And then if you can take and look at the components in the block, maybe this one was cut too small, and that's all it needs is for you to rip out that little corner unit and put another one in. Then that way your blocks will be nice and square. So I hope that you now understand how to square up blocks. You want to find center. You want to make sure you have the right side of the ruler up. You want to hold the ruler properly. Start cutting on one side, and always make sure that the fabric extends to the edge of the ruler and doesn't go underneath if you're using a ruler that's the exact same size that you're supposed to end up with. So run your 45-degree from corner to corner, and if you need to, you can take it and do this just to make sure the block is square, but it is. There we go, and it runs from corner to corner, spot on. And don't forget to trim your components as you are working with them before you join them to another one, so that when the entire block, everything is sewn together into a block, then it will be easier, just in case you do need to trim it even more. All right, you won't have to trim up a whole lot and it won't look messy. All right, I hope you enjoyed our tips for quilting and sewing, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Join us at the Annie's Creative website. We have a wonderful group of expert instructors for you. Have a wonderful day and hope to see you later. Bye.